Morning, everybody. It's great to be here at the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference. Really appreciate your time and attention. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Sylvester. I'm with Americans for Prosperity. If you're unfamiliar with our organization, we are a grassroots organization that aims to enact policies that allow for people to live their version of the American dream. We live in a world that's devoid of a lot of hope, and we want to be able to rekindle that hope and allow for people to live their best life, to reignite that American dream. We want to be able to restore that hope that allows for everybody to prosper. A little bit about myself before we delve into the meat and potatoes of everything. I actually immigrated to the United States from Canada. As far as I know, there's no tariffs on me at this point, but we'll see if that changes at all. I became a loud and proud U.S. citizen on October 25th, 2018. Thank you. And there's just something so surreal about being able to walk across an aisle, shake a master of ceremonies' hand, and receive a certificate that welcomes you to this country where there's just so much to love about it. Whether it's the ideals instilled in the Declaration of Independence. As I mentioned earlier, the idea of the American dream that no matter who you are or where you're from, if you come to this country with the right attitude and work hard, you can make it. And one of my favorite lines, even growing up in Canada, was the last line in the American national anthem. The idea that we are the land of the free and the home of the brave. And I absolutely love that line, because to truly be the land of the free, it takes brave people. It takes brave people who are not afraid to stand up for what they believe in and not afraid to fight for what's right. It's what's enabled a lot of the greatness within this country. And we've seen a lot of progress over the course of the past few months even, course of the past 6 or 7 months. But we want to make sure that we keep that going. People are starting to realize that there are problems that need to be solved within the United States, but we need to make sure that we continue that momentum and continue that motivation. And the question we need to ask ourselves today is, how can we continue to expand a movement that advances freedom? How do we continue to expand a movement that enables for people to live the American dream? So what we're going to be delving into are some tips and tricks that we can utilize when it comes to expanding the liberty movement. As much as we would like to believe that when we go out and about, if we just post something on the internet, someone will read it and immediately become motivated to take action, that's not the case for about 95% of people. Most people need some type of push, some type of level, extra layer of motivation to get off the couch and take action, and to go from being on the sidelines to being on the front lines of taking action. So what we want to look at is what that process involves, what it entails. From my experience before coming to Americans for Prosperity, I worked in public affairs, and a big part of that was motivating people to advocate for causes that they wouldn't typically think to advocate for in the first place. But the reality of that type of work, or even the type of advocacy work that we do on a regular basis, is we can give them that pitch, but if they don't get to know us, it's really difficult to convince them that we can actually make a difference. So ultimately, what we need to really think through is that process that it takes to get someone from being apathetic to get them to take action. And that first step is what you see on the screen right there, which is that of the cues that we see around us. Whether we realize it or not, every single one of us wants to relate to one another. We want to relate, we want to find something in common. Even the people with the most extreme political differences want to find something in common. We want to find those cues that can enable us to chat with one another. When I was talking about my experience with Canada earlier, you're probably thinking, oh, that guy's from the 51st state. There was some type of cue that could allow for you to relate to me in the way that I was talking to things. Anytime I see someone wearing sports gear, anytime I see someone wearing one of those things, it's an easy way to start up a conversation. This gentleman here is wearing a lot of buttons. It's a very easy cue for me to talk to this individual and find that common ground and get to know them. It's quite the collection. What we really need to think through is what are those things that can really get us in the door through those cues in our lives? Because by doing so, it can lead to that second step, which is the relationships that lead the way. When we think about Washington, D.C., we always hear that it's a revolving door. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, why is it a revolving door? Why is it the same people who are just in Congress leave and then immediately become an influential lobbyist? It's because of this key fact right here. It's that of the relationships that they have. When we are able to build a rapport, when we're able to build relationships with people, it makes a big difference in our ability to be influential, to be inspirational, and also to be able to get that access to that individual that we may not otherwise have. By building those relationships, it leads to this next step, which is that of trust. This is a key component to us being able to really relate to one another and inspire one another. Like I mentioned earlier, when I was working in public affairs, this was something that I realized very quickly, is that if I didn't have an existing relationship with the individual, it was hard for them to trust me when I was talking to them about a given political issue. And it didn't matter what that issue was. I could have had a client that said, we need you to have people to sponsor content that said that they cured cancer. But if I called them out of the blue and they answered and I said, hey, would you like to sponsor content that gives you credit for curing cancer? They wouldn't trust me because there's no existing relationship that is within that parameter. So they think it's some type of scam. It's a big reason why I'm assuming nobody in this room, or at least I hope nobody in this room, has ever answered one of those robocalls saying that your vehicle's extended warranty's up. You have no relationship with that individual, and you probably don't trust them, nor should you trust them. So the key for us to be influential and to make a difference in people's lives is to understand how we can build those relationships, because that is the crux of creating trust within the people around us. Those same people that I was talking about with the revolving door, they have that trust because they have that relationship. Because when you establish that trust, what that trust can lead to is your ability to educate someone on a given matter or a given issue. If you don't have that foundation of trust, it's hard to give them the information that will allow for them to be receptive to what it is that you're talking about. One of the best examples I can think of pertaining to my line of work when we were talking about issues such as these is I remember one of our clients wanted us to get better messaging on a random provision within what was at the time the North American Free Trade Agreement. It was a random provision. There were probably 5 people in the state of Iowa who even knew what it was, let alone people that would want to advocate for it. But what was helpful in these situations was I knew that this provision affected farmers in a variety of different ways. So through that, I was able to talk to people that I knew who were in the agricultural community. And because they knew me and because we had those cues, those things in common, whether it was sports or whatever else it was, and because there was an existing relationship, there was a level of trust that allowed for me to give them that information pertaining to that provision and how it would affect them and their families' livelihoods. Through that education, it then led to hopefully this next step when you all follow this process, which is that of motivation. They saw how this directly affected their family. They saw it was coming from an individual that they trusted and had an existing relationship with. And through that, they were able to be motivated to the point where they sponsored a letter to the editor to their local paper to let them know about the importance of this provision. What was funny about that is that individual submitted it thinking no one would care about that letter to the editor. But then they had members of their family coming up to them afterwards saying, I didn't know you were such an expert in agricultural policy. Little did they know that that little instance could then create that spiral of motivation for them to continually take action on a wide variety of different projects and different things. So that process is something that we always need to be looking at as we're trying to engage individuals, whether it's on a door-to-door level, whether it's at conferences, whether it's our friends, our family, whomever it is, understanding this process, understanding the cues that build those bonds and build that common ground. Understanding the relationships that come with finding that common ground with individuals. How we can then build that trust within everything that's happening. And through that trust, being able to educate, and then hopefully being able to motivate. We do this in our lives in so many different ways without even realizing it, especially if individuals work in sales or various fields that require us to talk to individuals on a regular basis. But one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is on that level and that matter of education. In other words, how can I turn education into motivation? How do I turn education into motivation? And the key to that is to understand what drives human behavior. What drives people to think in the way that they do, what drives people to operate in a manner that will want them to take action. One of the best examples that we can look at to figure this out is through a behavioral psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. I don't know how many people here are familiar with Jonathan Haidt. He has a lot of great books, a lot of great content on human behavior, human nature, and everything that comes with it. And what he found is that one of the biggest things that drives people's beliefs, what drives people's motivations, are underlying moral foundations that resonate with them. And when we can meet people where they're at and understand what these moral foundations are, it can make a huge difference in the way that we can resonate, relate, and talk to people. So he looked through life, he looked through how people made their decisions, and he ultimately determined that there are 6 moral foundations that drive people's behavior. I'll walk through each of them one at a time, but you can see how people in society utilize these moral foundations to influence the people around them. And it's really fascinating. Once you get an insight into this, it can help you better message on a wide variety of different fronts. The first moral foundation that he identified was that of caring. Many of us have maybe family members, friends, people in our community, people around us that care, and we really want to give people the best in life. With this moral foundation, though, what we have seen throughout society is various ways that people utilize this moral foundation to manipulate people into thinking in a certain way. One of the best examples I can think of is from 5 years ago. If anyone remembers that little-known virus, coronavirus, COVID, there was that talking point that if you left your house, that you were selfish. It meant that you didn't care about other people. It meant that they were not important to you on any circumstances. It was a way of trying to use this moral foundation to motivate people to think in a certain way. But the problem that I saw from a communications perspective from people who didn't agree with that thought process is typically the response would be something along the lines of, well, these lockdowns, they don't work. These lockdowns, they don't work, which was true, statistically speaking. But we never addressed the core moral foundation that was being discussed. And so as a result of that, they were able to drive that discussion for a lot longer. In this situation, what would have been interesting is if immediately upon hearing this idea that someone was selfish because they wanted to leave their home or operate their business or live their life, what would have been interesting is if maybe instead of just saying, well, they don't work, and accepting that they had the moral high ground, to start challenging what caring actually means. Because in essence, when you actually think about it, what they wanted to do was force people to stay in their home, give up their livelihoods, lose their job potentially, lose their business potentially, and stay in their home and do nothing because they were personally scared of a virus that had a 99% survivability rate. Does that sound like individuals who are caring and looking out for individuals? What we needed to see in this instance, and what I challenge you all and implore you all to think through, is when you see these types of moral foundations being used, to figure out how you can communicate your thoughts using that moral foundation. Instead of having maybe those two oblivious ships through the night where one person's saying that they care about this and you're just saying, well, they don't work. Because they're going to feel like that they have the upper hand, even if they think statistically they're wrong. It's a fascinating concept when we really think about it. And when we can learn to communicate through this manner, it makes a huge difference in how we can be influential. We saw it with the masks. I saw this with the masks as well, if everyone remembers that. I'm glad that we don't have to wear those anymore. But I remember with the masks, there was one time I was walking with a friend of mine. We were in a store, and I turned to them and I just said, you know those don't work, right? And they go, well, I know, but it just kind of feels like the right thing to do. Maybe you had a friend or a family member or an individual that had that type of situation where they just kind of felt like it was the right thing because we didn't address that core moral foundation behind it. So caring is one of the major ones that we see within our society. The next one is fairness. Some people say that life is inherently unfair, and there's definitely truth to that. But a lot of people, whether they like it or not, or believe it or not, crave fairness to some degree. We don't want George Orwell's Animal Farm in our society where some animals are created, all animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others. We don't want that within our society in a lot of different ways. One of the big talking points that I've heard where people will utilize that moral foundation of fairness is on the issue of taxes, which we'll talk about in more depth in a little bit. We've heard that phrase. I'm sure many people in this room have heard that phrase, that the wealthy need to pay their fair share. I'm assuming, I see some heads nodding, I'm assuming pretty much everyone has heard that phrase. One of the biggest flaws that I see from a communications perspective when we're trying to influence people is that when someone says the wealthy need to pay their fair share, we immediately go into the facts and the data and statistics. And we go, well, actually, from a statistical perspective, the wealthy do pay their fair share. They pay 40 to 50 to 60% of the taxes, all of which is true. But the problem is they dictate the terms of the discussion because you haven't attacked the premise that the wealthy need to pay their fair share. So they can make up whatever number they want. You could say they pay 60% of the taxes, and they could say, no, well, actually, they need to pay 80%. It's not enough. Actually, they need to pay 90%. Actually, they need to give everything up, and then probably come up with something after that. One of the things that we've noticed when it comes to communicating issues like tax reform is that from a fairness perspective, when you actually think about taxes on its face and on its premise, in many cases, you're taking away people's hard-earned money. I know growing up with my mom, she worked 80 hours a week. 80 hours a week, and growing up in Canada, she would lose over 50% of her paycheck to taxes. Does that sound fair to anybody? What did the government do to advance her business that day? She was in the meetings, she was doing the work, she was getting the clients to her business, she was advocating for them, she was doing all of this work, and then the government comes in and takes over half of her paycheck. It's like that group project where someone doesn't do any of the work, and then they come in and take credit for 60% of it. It's not inherently fair. And when we communicate that, people start to understand the importance of allowing for people to keep their hard-earned money. It's incredible from a polling perspective how many people believe that you should be able to keep what you have earned. So we always need to be thinking about, from a communications perspective, how we can talk about things from those moral lenses. Because it makes a massive difference in how we can influence and how we can really drive the discussions that are going on within our society. So we have caring, we have fairness. The next one is loyalty. You see authority right there, but it is loyalty. We always want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, whether we want to admit it or not. Companies know this extremely well. There's all kinds of loyalty programs. It doesn't matter if it's a gas station, a grocery store, an airline, a hotel, whatever it is. They know that we want to be a part of something. We want to be loyal to something. We want to be a part of something that's potentially bigger than ourselves. Donald Trump understands this very well, and it's why he's been, in many respects, an effective communicator. He talks about putting America first. That's one of his big tenets, one of his big priorities. And because of that, he's appealing to our sense of loyalty. We're proud Americans in this room. We want to put America first. We want the best for this country. We want to make it great again. And that appeal to loyalty is something that can really motivate individuals in getting involved in that higher cause. So loyalty is definitely something where we see a moral foundation that really drives people to take action. And when we can talk about how what we're doing is bigger than ourselves, it really creates that new sense of purpose that maybe wasn't there before. So you have caring, you have fairness, you have loyalty. You probably saw it earlier, authority. And this moral foundation can be used in a wide variety of different fronts. One of the main ones that we saw during the coronavirus was people saying, well, the experts say this, the experts say that. A lot of us have the humility to admit that we don't know everything, and that there are certain guiding principles that can help us make those right decisions. Unfortunately, that can be manipulated in certain respects, where they say the experts say this, even if the experts are wrong on a variety of different fronts. But we see authority drive behavior in a lot of different respects. When we talk about the Constitution, one of the most revolutionary, important documents in history, it's a great form of authority to allow for us to figure out what's right and what's wrong. Anytime you hear someone say something along the lines of, that's unconstitutional, that is someone appealing to that moral foundation of authority. The Bible is also a great form for people to get their morals from. That authority that helps us figure out what is right and what is wrong. So you have caring, fairness, loyalty, authority. The next one is sanctity. That need for pureness within our society. That also has that biblical root. We have the sanctity of life. We have the sanctity of marriage. We have all kinds of different elements that involve sanctity within our society. One of the better examples I can think of in recent memory is if you've seen any of those books in libraries that have repulsed you, you've seen maybe some content that just immediately made you want to jump back. That means that you have a deep sense of sanctity, that you want to uphold the innocence and pureness within our society. Sanctity is another big one that we see. And then the last one is liberty. And when it comes to something along the lines of liberty, some people really just want to ask themselves, should we be allowed to do that? Should we be allowed to do that? Maybe it's a bit strange, maybe it's a bit different, maybe we shouldn't be able to, maybe it's wrong in some respects, but should we be allowed to do that? And this principle of liberty is a big factor as to why the United States has become what it is, the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's an important value that really makes a big difference. Here's the interesting part about these moral foundations. You can actually take the moral foundations test online to figure out which values drive your behavior, which beliefs you hold near and dear to you. And there's a lot of people who have taken this exam. There's a ton of different results. But what we have noticed is that there's a huge difference between how political affiliations look at the moral foundations. Ton of differences. So for starters, you might be looking at the graph right here and you see the liberal side, you see the conservative side, and you see the libertarian side. One of the things that might stick out to you as you're looking at it is the liberal side of things. You look at caring and you look at fairness, and those are extremely high up on the priorities list. But then everything else is extremely low. Whereas on the conservative side, you see it's a little bit more rounded. You see caring and fairness is there, but then you also see sanctity, you see authority, you see liberty, you see all of these different moral foundations within those discussions. Knowing this can really help you communicate with whichever group that you're trying to resonate with or talk to. And when you think through a lot of the political causes and the political issues that we see out there, when we look at the way that they're messaged, you can see this play out. When I was talking about the wealthy paying their fair share, when I was talking about the selfishness aspect of COVID, when I was talking about all of these different issues, what we saw is that there was predominantly caring and fairness involved in terms of the moral foundations they were using in their communication. Whereas with a lot of the conservative causes, whether it's America First, whether it's something pertaining to the Constitution, whether it's pertaining to pretty much any issue that you can think of, there's a lot of different foundations that can be used. So the trap that sometimes that we can fall into when we're discussing something with someone is they might be approaching it from an issue of caring, whereas we might be approaching it from an issue of authority. And having these conversations with individuals to figure out where we're at can help move the needle forward in a very productive manner. But here's the thing with all of this. You might be asking yourself, well, how do I find out people's moral foundations? How do I find out what truly drives their behavior? The reality of our society is you can't just go up to someone and say, hey, what are your moral foundations? They're going to look at you as if you're crazy. So I don't recommend doing that under any circumstances. Maybe if you've built some relationships and some trust, you can educate on it. But there are ways that we can learn a lot about individuals and those moral foundations that really can take things to another step. One of the best acronyms that we look at from a conversational perspective and regarding to getting to know people is the acronym that is known as FORM. So you have, maybe if you've worked in sales, you probably are familiar with this acronym, but F stands for family. Getting to know people and their family dynamics and what they care about can really help you identify what a lot of those moral foundations are. I don't recommend being creepy about that. Don't ask what time their kids get out of school. But just asking questions about their parents, about their siblings, about their cousins, about some of the activities they like to do together. All of those different things can make a huge difference in understanding where people's principles and priorities are. Some people, family is the first priority. For others, maybe not as much. Asking these questions can make a huge difference in terms of our ability to understand where people's moral foundations are. Family is a big one. The second one is occupation. O for occupation. What do you do for work? What do you do for a living? We ask that question so many times with so many different people, but what is fascinating is that by knowing what someone does for work, we can learn a lot about that individual, what some of their passions are, what some of their beliefs are to some extent. And there's been a lot of studies that have shown correlations between the industries in which people work and their underlying political motivations and political beliefs. All kinds of different correlations within that. You're probably thinking to yourself, and maybe one of the questions you might be asking is, what are the industries where we find a lot of conservative individuals, and what are the industries where we find a lot of liberal individuals? And it really is, when you think about it, interesting how many industries are so concentrated with a certain type of belief. With conservatives, maybe you have some guesses in mind. But with conservatives, some of the main industries that we see a predominant tilt towards that ideology are in finance, the oil and gas industry, manufacturing, agriculture. There's a few others as well, but those are some of the main ones that we see. From the liberal side of things, a lot of it is teaching, education. Hollywood, we know Hollywood has probably, 95% people with a liberal ideology. So acting, entertainment, journalism. Those are some of the biggest ones where we saw that huge divide. Here's the fascinating part about when you examine these two differences. What you'll notice is from the conservative perspective, a lot of the jobs that are dominated by conservatives involve very tangible things that we can see in front of us. With agriculture, it's agricultural products. And we know how that goes. Oil and gas, you can see oil and gas. Finance, it's with money. A lot of business owners tend to lean conservative for a variety of reasons. And most of the time when you're operating a business, you're offering some type of tangible good or service that someone can utilize. In many cases, you can see right in front of you the things that conservatives are doing. On the liberal side of things, however, it's often more abstract. You think about a professor, for example. A lot of what they're talking about, a lot of what they're discussing is much more in the abstract, it's much more in the ether. It's not necessarily things that we see in front of us every day. Same with acting, same with journalism, same with a lot of these different subject matters. When you get to know someone's occupation, you not just get to know some of the things that they do, but in many cases you can get insights into some of the things that they hold near and dear to them, some of the principles that make them who they are as a person. It's subtle in a lot of manners. But it is fascinating to learn about as you examine these different moral foundations and these different ways that people think. So you have family, you have occupation. The next one is the letter R, which stands for recreation. Some people, maybe they're not very close to their family. Some people, maybe they don't like their job. But everybody in this room probably has some type of hobby. Maybe you like guns. Maybe you like sports. Maybe you like something that's not guns or sports. But either way, there's some type of thing that you enjoy doing in your spare time. And as a result of that, you can learn a lot about that individual. Same thing with occupation. You notice that there's some tilts within ideology for certain industries. There are certain recreational activities that also have certain tilts in terms of what drives what. For example, if you're a fan of guns, you like going to the gun range, maybe you're part of the NRA, odds are you're a little more conservative. Just going to go out on a limb on that one. On the other hand, if one of your hobbies is being a vegan, might be a little bit more liberal. Maybe not, there's exceptions. But ultimately, through hobbies and through learning what people do for fun, you can learn a lot about their beliefs. You can learn a lot about their behaviors. You can learn a lot about the way that they operate in a variety of different respects. So think through that. It's one of the best questions you can ask because ultimately we all have those hobbies. We all have those things that we enjoy doing. We all have those passions in our life that propel us forward. So you have family, you have occupation, you have recreation, and then the last one is motivation. What gets people to get out of bed in the morning? Why do they care about a certain thing? One of the best questions you can ask from a motivation perspective is, where do you get your morals from? Do they get it from God? Or do they get it from somewhere else? These types of questions can really delve into the crux of how someone operates. And it's something that I highly encourage you all to do when you're asking questions. Because ultimately, when it comes to building relationships, and when it comes to making those bonds with individuals, we always need to look back to Dale Carnegie's classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Oftentimes, we are far more influential. We're far better at bringing people into our causes by being interested in an individual as opposed to being interesting. So what I challenge you all to do as you leave this room and you think through this stuff is, what type of questions can I ask of individuals that will help build relationships with them, help build trust, help better educate them, help motivate them, and most importantly, help me understand what values they hold close to them so that I can meet them where they're at when I'm having these discussions and find that common ground that moves everything forward. It's amazing how many important movements throughout the course of history have used acronyms like these, how many movements have started just through those simple one-on-one conversations of getting to know people. It's not rocket science, but it is something that can make a big difference. So one of the questions you might be asking yourself when it comes to all of this that we've talked about the process that gets people from apathy to action. We've talked about the values that drive people's decision making. We've talked about the ways that we can better understand people's values that drive that decision making. But one of the questions that you might be asking yourself is okay, so I know all of this, that's great and all, but what's something that I can do? What's a cause that I can move towards where I can bring people in? And right now, there's a ton of potential to grow this country. There's a ton of potential to enact policies and enact things that make people's lives better on a variety of different fronts. And the question that we always need to be asking ourselves is, what motivates my neighbor? What motivates my friends? What motivates my family? What motivates people to take action? Oftentimes, we see this. We see people who just can't be bothered. We see people, it seems like it doesn't matter what we say to them or what we do, they just will not care under any circumstances. But what's amazing is when you follow this process and you work to get to know that individual, you can figure out how that relates to them personally. Whether we want to believe it or not, most people get involved with stuff because it affects them on some level, on a personal level. And there's a lot of different ways in which we can pursue that and go about that. And one of the policies that we see affecting people on a regular basis and on an everyday basis is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That's set to expire within the course of the next year if that doesn't get renewed. And there are a lot of very serious consequences that could happen on a human level if we don't get these tax cuts renewed. Statistically speaking, if this does not get renewed, Pennsylvanian families could potentially pay upwards of $2,000 or more in additional taxes. I want you to just think about that. We like to talk about the numbers. We like to talk about it from a monetary perspective. But think about that on a human level. What an additional $2,000+ can do for an individual. There's a lot of different things. I remember one of the communications aspects that I saw on this issue of taxes is you hear it all the time, is they say something along the lines of, well, it's only the wealthy that benefit. It's not fair because it's only the wealthy that benefit, and other people only gain as much as maybe $2,000. That's not very much, and it's not a big deal. But again, if you take that step back and you look at it from that human perspective, what you start to realize is $2,000 can help pay utility bills. That can help pay mortgages. That can help pay for a variety of different things. And not just that, it can help pay for fond memories that families can have for one another should they use it for something like a vacation. There are so many different elements and layers within this that allow for people to live a better life. And all we need to do is talk to our members of Congress to make sure that they understand that if they don't extend these tax breaks, if they don't extend these tax cuts, that hurts families. That hurts people's ability to take care of one another. But it also hurts businesses as well, which in turn can hurt individuals especially those tied to those businesses. What we've also seen from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is if it is not extended, we'll see businesses paying a lot higher in taxes, losing more of their revenue. And that's less money that the business can then invest within their company. That's less money that the business can invest in bringing in new employees. If it's bad enough, it might even lead to businesses having to cut people's jobs, cut people's livelihoods. These are important human factors that we always need to be discussing when we're talking with individuals, how we can make that human, how we can show that it isn't just about the nuts and bolts, it's not just about the numbers, it's about lives. It's about the American dream. It's about people's ability to care for one another, to care for their family members, to care for themselves. And that's what we always need to be looking at when it comes to issues like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. There's a lot of different ways you can talk about it. From a fairness perspective, it's about allowing for people to keep their hard-earned money. From a caring perspective, it's allowing for people to look out for one another, create memories with each other. It's allowing for businesses to be able to take care of the community better by finding more opportunities for individuals. From a loyalty perspective, when you think about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from a loyalty perspective, we're putting people first. This is an America First policy when you really think about it, because it is a policy that puts power into the hands of people and putting our people first over some of the other situations. From a authority perspective, the data is there. In fact, what you'll find out is we got a pretty elaborate booth over there, and we have a ton of information and statistics from a ton of different experts on why the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act makes such a huge difference from not just a fiscal perspective, but from a human perspective. There's a lot of data, a lot of information. There's a lot of different organizations that devote their time towards showing why this is so important. And ultimately, from a liberty perspective, it gives people that freedom to spend the money in the ways that they see fit. And that's another huge component that we always need to be looking at. This is one of the big issues, hot button issues that we're seeing within our society. We've already seen over the course of the past 4 years rampant inflation. It's getting harder and harder for people to pay their bills. It's getting more and more difficult for people to buy homes. From a home perspective, as I mentioned earlier, growing up in Toronto, one of the things that blows my mind is how astronomical the costs have gotten there. And I'm sure it's been like this in many major cities in the United States too. My brother actually just bought his first home in Toronto, and it was a 3-bed, 2-bathroom starter home. It was a nice home, but it cost him $1.6 million. $1.6 million. It's a lot of money. Yeah, I can hear the reactions in the crowd here. That's just a starter home. It's not getting easier for people. We don't want to add on an additional layer that makes it even more difficult for people to save their money, that makes it even more difficult for people to get that down payment on a $1.6 million home, whatever it is. We want to make life better for people. We want to make it easier for people. And it's not, because of what we've seen, especially over the course of the past 4 years prior. We see it, we saw it. We all experienced it in this room. We all saw how even though people were getting raises on paper, is being taken away by the rising cost of living that we see around us. You probably can think of someone within your life who is struggling to make ends meet right now. And we always need to be figuring out those ways that can make that just a touch easier for them so that they can continue to pursue their American dream. I want to close out here quick with just the number one piece of advice before we talk about some ways that you can continue to take action and get involved in ways to expand liberty, to expand freedom, and to expand opportunity for people. But one of the traps that I see people fall into on a regular basis when it comes to life, when it comes to trying to make things happen or get things done, is we try to come up with the perfect plan or the perfect message or the perfect thing to say at the perfect time for the perfect individual on the perfect occasion. The problem with that mindset is that we forget to actually put ourselves out there and try different things. Because if it's not perfect, then we don't go for it. But what I encourage you all to do is as you're talking with your friends, as you're talking with your family, as you're talking with your neighbors, or whomever it is, even people who disagree with you, ask those questions. Be interested in that individual. And don't think that you have to say the perfect thing at the perfect time. Because we're always learning as individuals how we can better communicate, how we can better resonate with people, and how we can make that difference. So to illustrate this point, I want to tell you a story about my brother. Not the brother who just bought the $1.6 million home, another brother of mine. Brilliant individual, but he falls into that trap that I was just telling you all about, where he tries to come up with the perfect plan in the perfect instance at the perfect time without ever actually trying to execute or try anything out. I remember one day I got a message from him and he said, hey, so I don't like where my life is going. I want to get a little bit healthier. Do you have any advice for me? And I said, well, I'm not exactly Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I didn't play basketball despite my height. I played tennis, but nobody ever asks, do you play basketball, or do you play tennis? They ask, do you play basketball? So I said, yeah, I know a little bit. I'll just give you some information here. Maybe you'll find it helpful. So I send it along, and he goes, yeah, I looked at your information, and I think it sucks. I don't think it's any good. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. You can tell me the information sucks. You're approaching this from the moral foundation of authority because you looked at some expert opinions, and that's what you're looking at. But ultimately, what I approached it from what I looked at it is basically, as I said, look, you're not going to know from an authority perspective whether it works or not unless you actually go to the gym or you try out some of these foods that my program recommends for you. So how about this? Just go out, give it a shot. If you like it, great. If not, that's not a problem. You've learned and you're working things out, and you'll figure something out that works for you. So just try it and just go. Okay, sounds good. So about 3 days go by, I get another message, and he goes, so I've been spending about 8 hours on Reddit doing research about all these different regimens. And I found that this one is better than this one. The expert said that this one was good, but it was a little bit cookie cutter. This one is good, this one's bad. I'm just confused. I don't know what to do. And at that point, I just went, stop. You're not going to gain 20 pounds of muscle by reading Reddit 8 hours a day. If we could gain 20 pounds of muscle reading Reddit 8 hours a day, we'd all be Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. It'd be incredible. We'd be in amazing shape as a society. But I promise, just pick one of these. Just pick one and try it out. I promise if it fails, you will learn something. You will get better. You will improve. And that is the key to life, is improving. Okay, sounds good. So another 3 days go by. I get another message. It's an email this time. It says no subject. So I'm curious. And I click on it. And all it says is, so what type of headphones should I wear when I go to the gym? Yeah, what type of headphones? Well, there's music at the gym. That doesn't make or break whether you're going to be in the shape that you are. Beats headphones might want you to think that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is in the shape that he is because of the headphones he wears, but we all know that's not true. So please, just pick something and just try it out. There's no need to overthink it. All of the best athletes, all of the best entertainers, all of the best business people, one of the things that you'll learn with them is that they had a vision, but they had a lot of failure along the way. And through that failure, they learned a lot of their best lessons. They learned how to maximize their product. They learned how to maximize their service. They learned how they could then get to where they are today. I guarantee there's not a single billionaire or successful entrepreneur or successful business owner who just created something on the first try and then immediately jumped to the promised land. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot for us to get to where we want to be in life. But the only way we can get there is if we put ourselves out there. If we, even with people in this conference, if we look around for those cues, if we try to build those relationships with people through asking those questions about their family, about their occupation, about their recreation, about their motivation, through that trust that we can build with individuals, through that ability for us, through that trust, to educate people on the things that matter to us and learn more about the things that matter to them through those moral foundations. And most importantly, through all of that, we can make a big difference in expanding that movement that allows for us to live in a freer, more prosperous society that enables everybody to live their version of the American dream. And that's what we all want in this room. We want everybody to be able to get a chance to be part of this country that is this shining city on a hill, to be a part of that dream that many of us have growing up. If you want to get involved with our organization, we have a booth out there. We have a lot of different ways that you can take that first step and work towards expanding the movement of liberty. And so we encourage you all to stop by at some point in time throughout the course of the day today. We have a lot of different ways that you can get involved, get engaged, really make a difference in our society. And the big thing to remember with this world and with our life is that we got one opportunity here to turn this country around. And the only way we're going to do that is if we continually work towards that, if we continually operate under the guise that we are the land of the free and the home of the brave. So I encourage you all, be brave in your advocacy for the things that you care about. And by doing so, I promise that you will influence a lot of people through your passion. And even if you don't, you will learn a lot along the way. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoy the conference.
Let's